What would you do if the most powerful being in the galaxy walked up to you and asked a simple question that shattered everything you thought you knew about yourself? Captain Marcus Chen thought he was just another human trying to survive in a universe where his species was considered the weakest link in the galactic food chain. For 3 years, he'd successfully avoided the Zephyrian Empire's most feared ruler, Queen Vexera, a being whose mere presence could level cities and whose tactical genius had conquered 17 star systems. But, when she cornered him in a remote space station's cantina, asking why he kept running from her, Marcus discovered that sometimes the most terrifying predators in the universe aren't hunting you for the reasons you think. And, sometimes, being human means something far more dangerous than anyone, including the humans themselves, ever realized. This is the story of how one conversation between a terrified human and a curious alien queen changed the balance of power in the entire galaxy, and why the phrase "never underestimate humanity" became the most feared warning in every alien military handbook. Marcus Chen's hands trembled as he stared into his drink, the amber liquid reflecting the dim lights of the cantina. 3 years. 3 years he'd managed to stay off the radar of the most dangerous being in known space. 3 years of careful planning, fake identities, and sleeping with one eye open. All of that careful work was about to go down the drain because he'd made one stupid mistake. He'd gotten comfortable. The cantina on Nexus Station buzzed with the usual mix of traders, smugglers, and travelers from dozens of different species. The air was thick with smoke from various alien substances, and the translator implants in everyone's ears worked overtime to convert the babble of alien languages into something resembling coherent conversation. Marcus had chosen this place specifically because it was loud, crowded, and anonymous. Nobody paid attention to one human among hundreds of aliens. Except someone had been paying attention. Marcus felt the shift in the cantina's atmosphere before he saw her. Conversations didn't stop all at once, that would have been too obvious. Instead, they faded gradually, like someone slowly turning down the volume on the galaxy's biggest party. The Thraxian at the next table suddenly found his drink fascinating. The group of Kalari merchants near the entrance became very interested in their datapads. Even the bartender, a gruff Vorthan with 4 arms, found urgent business cleaning glasses that were already spotless. Marcus knew he was in trouble when the shadows seemed to bend toward his table. That's when she spoke, her voice cutting through the diminished noise of the cantina like a blade through silk. "You're very difficult to find, Marcus Chen." He didn't turn around immediately. Maybe if he ignored her, she'd go away. Maybe this was all a nightmare brought on by too much Rigelian whiskey. "Maybe I said you're difficult to find." The voice was closer now, right behind his left shoulder. "Most humans would consider that a compliment, coming from me." Marcus finally turned around, and immediately regretted it. Queen Vexera of the Zephyrian Empire stood barely 3 feet away, and she was even more terrifying in person than in the holographic recordings that had haunted his nightmares for years. She was tall, nearly 7 feet, with the characteristic blue-black skin of her species and those unsettling silver eyes that seemed to look right through you and catalog everything they found. Her hair was a cascade of what looked like liquid starlight, shifting between deep purple and silver depending on how the light hit it. She wore simple civilian clothes, a dark jacket and pants that somehow managed to look both casual and threatening on her frame. But it was her presence that made Marcus's mouth go dry. This was a being who had personally led the conquest of 17 star systems. A being whose tactical genius was studied in military academies across the galaxy. A being who could, according to the stories, kill someone just by looking at them hard enough. And she was standing in a seedy cantina on a backwater station, talking to him. "Your Majesty," Marcus managed to croak out, starting to stand. "Sit." The command was soft, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Marcus sat so fast he almost missed his chair. "And don't call me that here. Vex is fine." She moved around to the other side of his small table with a fluid grace that reminded Marcus uncomfortably of a predator circling prey. When she sat down across from him, the chair groaned under her weight. Zephyrians were much denser than humans, all muscle and reinforced bone structure evolved for their high-gravity homeworld. "You haven't answered my question," she said, folding her hands on the table. Up close, Marcus could see the intricate tattoos that covered her knuckles, marks of rank and achievement in Zephyrian culture. Each one represented a military victory or political triumph. There were a lot of them. "What question?" Marcus asked, though his voice came out as more of a squeak. Why you keep running from me? The simple statement hung in the air between them like an unexploded bomb. Marcus stared at her, trying to process what she just said. Running from her? He wasn't running from her specifically, he was running from everything. The Empire, the wars, the constant reminders that humanity was considered the galaxy's newest and least impressive species. I'm not running from you, he said finally. I'm running from everyone. Vexera tilted her head slightly, and Marcus caught a glimpse of the predator that lived behind those silver eyes. Interesting distinction. Explain. Marcus glanced around the cantina, noting that while the other patrons were trying to pretend they weren't listening, the place had gotten so quiet you could probably hear someone's heartbeat from 3 tables away. Maybe we could discuss this somewhere more private? No. The word was final. Here is fine. You've been hiding for 3 years, Marcus Chen. 3 years during which you've turned down 17 job offers, refused 12 attempts at contact from my diplomatic corps, and somehow managed to avoid every intelligence network in the Empire. That level of skill at disappearing suggests you're either a master spy or you're terrified of something. Since our background check indicates you were a cargo hauler before the Kalari incident, I'm leaning toward terrified. The mention of the Kalari incident made Marcus's stomach drop through the floor. Of course she knew about that. Of course she'd investigated him. This was Queen Vexera, she probably knew things about him that he'd forgotten himself. The Kalari incident was an accident, he said quietly. Was it? The question was asked mildly, but Marcus heard the steel underneath. He met her gaze for the first time since she'd sat down, and immediately wished he hadn't. Those silver eyes were like looking into the depths of space itself, beautiful, terrible, and utterly alien. Yes, it was an accident, he said, more firmly this time. I was just trying to deliver medical supplies to their colony. I didn't know their defense grid would interpret my cargo manifest as an invasion fleet specification. But, you fixed it. I corrected a misunderstanding. You single-handedly negotiated a ceasefire between the Kalari Defense Force and an Imperial patrol that was about to turn their planet into a crater. Using nothing but a cargo hauler's communications array and what our translators described as an extremely creative interpretation of galactic diplomatic protocols. Vexera leaned back in her chair, studying him. The Kalari still consider you their savior. They've erected statues. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. It wasn't that big a deal. Anyone could have, no. The interruption was sharp. Anyone could not have. The Imperial Patrol Commander was my nephew, Marcus. Commander Kethvar. He's a good soldier, but he has a tendency to shoot first and ask questions later. In the 3 hours before you opened communications, he'd already armed his ship's planetary bombardment systems. He was 60 seconds away from turning 2 billion Kalari civilians into radioactive dust. The cantina had gone completely silent now. Even the background hum of the station's air recycling systems seemed muted. Marcus could feel dozens of alien eyes on him, and he wished desperately that he was anywhere else in the galaxy. You talked him out of it, Vexera continued. Not just out of firing, but out of the entire aggressive posture. By the time your conversation was over, he was offering to escort Kalari trade ships through Imperial space. Do you know how you did that? Marcus shook his head. Neither do we. We've had our best analysts go over the recording of that conversation dozens of times. Linguists, psychologists, military strategists, everyone agrees it should have been impossible. Kethvar doesn't back down. He doesn't negotiate. He follows orders and destroys things that threaten the Empire. But, somehow, in the span of 23 minutes, you convinced him that helping the Kalari was not just acceptable, but his duty as an Imperial officer. Vexera leaned forward, and Marcus caught a scent like ozone and alien flowers. That conversation has been required study material in our diplomatic corps for 2 years. They call it the Chun Protocol. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. They call it what? The Chun Protocol. A negotiation technique based on your approach during the Kalari incident. We've tried to teach it to our diplomats, but none of them can replicate your results. Do you know why? Marcus shook his head again, feeling increasingly like he was drowning. Because it only works for humans. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus stared at the alien queen across from him, trying to process what she just said. That's impossible. Is it? Vexara's expression was unreadable. Tell me, Marcus, what did you think during those 23 minutes? What was going through your mind while you were talking my nephew out of committing genocide? Marcus closed his eyes, trying to remember. The Kalari incident felt like a lifetime ago, but the memory was still crystal clear. He'd been terrified, obviously. Absolutely convinced he was about to die in the crossfire between an Imperial patrol and a planetary defense grid. But, underneath the terror, there had been something else. I kept thinking about the children, he said slowly. The Kalari children in the colony. How they probably didn't even know there were Imperial ships in their system. How they were probably just playing games or learning their lessons or whatever Kalari children do, and, in a few minutes they might all be dead, and they'd never know why. And I thought about Commander Kethvar's children. Because he mentioned them early in the conversation, something about wanting to get home to see his daughter's first flight trial. I kept thinking about how he probably wasn't evil, just scared and following orders, and how if those Kalari children died, he'd have to live with that for the rest of his life. How his own children would grow up knowing their father was responsible for 2 billion deaths. Marcus opened his eyes to find Vexara staring at him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. So you made it personal. I made it human. The words came out before Marcus could stop them, and he immediately regretted them. But Vexara's expression didn't change. Explain that. I don't know how to explain it, Marcus said helplessly. I kept thinking about how everyone involved was somebody's child, somebody's parent, somebody's friend. How all of these massive political and military concepts came down to individual people who were scared and trying to do what they thought was right. So I talked to Commander Kethvar like he was human. Like he was someone who cared about the same things I cared about. And it worked. Apparently. Vexara was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus like he was some kind of fascinating puzzle. Around them, the cantina remained silent, as if the entire room was holding its breath. Do you know what makes humans unique in this galaxy, Marcus? The question came out of nowhere, and Marcus blinked in surprise. Unique? We're not unique. We're the newcomers, remember? The species that just figured out faster than light travel 50 years ago. We're barely above pre-industrial on the galactic development scale. Technologically, yes. But technology isn't everything. Vexara leaned forward again, her silver eyes intense. Do you know how many species we've encountered in our expansion across the galaxy? Marcus shook his head. 417. From silicon-based crystalline entities that think in geological timescales, to energy beings that exist as pure thought, to hive minds that encompass entire planets. 417 different forms of intelligent life, each with their own strengths, their own perspectives, their own contributions to galactic civilization. She paused, letting that sink in. And, in all of that diversity, humans are the only species that consistently exhibits what we call empathic projection. Empathic what? The ability to genuinely understand and relate to the emotional and psychological states of completely alien species. Most beings can learn to work with aliens, trade with them, even fight alongside them. But humans are the only species that can consistently put themselves in an alien's place and understand not just what they're thinking, but why they're thinking it. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. That's not possible. Empathy is just basic psychology. Every species has to have it to some degree, or they'd never develop civilization. Every species has empathy for their own kind, Vexara corrected. Some can extend it to similar species. But humans can empathize with beings so alien that they might as well be living mathematics. Do you know what that means? No. It means humans are the galaxy's most dangerous species. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stared at the alien queen, waiting for her to explain the joke, but her expression remained deadly serious. Dangerous, he managed. We can barely hold our own in a fair fight against most galactic species. Our technology is centuries behind the major powers. Our military is a joke compared to the Empire. Your military is irrelevant, Vexera said dismissively. Your technology is interesting but not threatening. But your empathy? That's the most powerful weapon in the galaxy. She stood up suddenly, and Marcus automatically started to rise as well before her gesture told him to stay seated. Think about it, Marcus. What's the most effective way to defeat an enemy? Superior firepower? To make them not want to be your enemy anymore. Vexera's smile was sharp and alien, but there was something almost approving in it. And humans are the only species that can do that consistently, across cultural and biological barriers that should make communication impossible. Marcus felt like the world was tilting around him. You're saying humans are dangerous because we're nice? I'm saying humans are dangerous because you can make anyone like you. And beings who like you don't want to fight you. They want to help you. They want to protect you. They want to give you things. Vexera walked around the table until she was standing directly beside Marcus's chair. Up close, he could feel the heat radiating from her body and see the intricate patterns in her alien tattoos. For 3 years, I've been trying to figure out if humans represent a threat to the Empire. 3 years of analysis, observation, and investigation. And do you know what conclusion I've reached? Marcus shook his head, not trusting his voice. Humans don't represent a threat to the Empire, Vexera said quietly. Humans represent a threat to the very concept of empire. Because you make conquest irrelevant. Why take something by force when you can convince the owner to give it to you freely? She placed one hand on the back of his chair, and Marcus could feel the strength in those fingers, strength that could probably crush steel. That's why you've been running, isn't it? You figured it out. Maybe not consciously, but some part of you understood what you are, what your species is, and it terrified you. Marcus tried to speak and found his throat completely dry. He managed to croak out a single word. What? You're not just a random human, Marcus. You're patient zero for a phenomenon that could reshape galactic civilization. Every human we've studied shows some degree of the same ability, but you're the strongest example we've found. You don't just have empathic projection, you have it at a level that makes you essentially irresistible to alien psychology. Vexera moved around to face him directly, those silver eyes boring into his. 3 different species have offered to make you their honorary leader based on brief conversations. The Kalari want to build a temple to you. The Thraxian Trade Consortium has standing orders that any human requesting assistance is to be given whatever they ask for, no questions asked. Do you know why? Because they're afraid of what will happen if they refuse? No. Vexera's smile returned, sharp and predatory. Because they genuinely want to help you. Because in the span of brief interactions, you made them care about human welfare more than their own institutional interests. The cantina around them might as well have ceased to exist. Marcus felt like he was trapped in a bubble of unreality, where alien queens said impossible things and the fundamental nature of his species was being redefined by someone who could probably kill him with her bare hands. This is insane, he whispered. This is evolution, Vexera corrected. Humans evolved on a world with only one sapient species, so your empathy had to be flexible enough to work across massive cultural and individual differences. Every other species in the galaxy evolved alongside other sapient species, so their empathy is specialized for their specific interspecies relationships. You're generalists. We're specialists. And, in a galaxy with 417 different forms of intelligent life, generalists have a massive advantage. She leaned down until her face was level with his, and Marcus caught that alien scent again: ozone and flowers and something indefinably other. I didn't come here to capture you, Marcus. I came here to offer you a job. Marcus stared at Queen Vexera, certain he'd misheard her. A job? A job. She straightened up, but remained standing close enough that Marcus had to crane his neck to look at her. Specifically, I want you to come to the Imperial capital and teach us how to do what you do. What I do? Marcus's voice cracked. I don't do anything. I just talk to people. Exactly. Vexera's expression was deadly serious. You just talked to people and somehow convinced them to abandon centuries of established policy, personal prejudices, and institutional momentum. Do you have any idea how impossible that should be? Marcus looked around the cantina, desperate for some kind of escape route, but every eye in the place was still focused on their table. He felt like a specimen in a laboratory, being dissected by beings he couldn't even begin to understand. Look, he said, turning back to Vexera, I think you're overestimating what happened with the Kalari thing. It really wasn't that complicated. You just convinced an Imperial commander to risk court-martial rather than follow direct orders, Vexera interrupted. Orders that came from me, personally. That stopped Marcus cold. From you? The Kalari system was designated for military annexation. The colony was considered a strategic threat because of its location near our shipping lanes. Commander Kethvar had explicit instructions to eliminate any resistance and establish an Imperial garrison. Vexera's smile was thin and sharp. Instead, he filed a report recommending we establish a formal trade agreement and offer the Kalari Protectorate status. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. He disobeyed your direct orders? He did. And, when I asked him why, do you know what he said? Marcus shook his head. He said that after talking to you, he realized the Kalari weren't a threat, they were an opportunity. That destroying them would be a waste of potential resources and a stain on Imperial honor. Vexera leaned back slightly, studying Marcus's expression. Kethvar has been a soldier his entire adult life. He follows orders without question and trusts in Imperial superiority above all else. The idea that he would suddenly develop humanitarian concerns was so unlikely that we initially assumed he'd been subjected to some kind of alien mind control. But he hadn't been. No. Our medical scans showed no evidence of mental manipulation. No drugs, no psychic influence, no technological interference. He'd simply changed his mind. Vexera moved back to her chair and sat down again, her movements fluid and controlled. So we investigated further. We pulled the communication logs from every human-alien interaction we could find over the past 3 years. Do you know what we discovered? Marcus was starting to feel nauseous. What? A pattern. Humans consistently achieve diplomatic and negotiation results that should be statistically impossible. Not just you, all humans. But the effect is strongest with individuals who have what your species calls people skills. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small data pad, setting it on the table between them. The screen showed a complex chart filled with numbers and graphs that meant nothing to Marcus. This is a compilation of every recorded human-alien negotiation over the past 3 years, Vexera explained. Trade agreements, conflict resolutions, first contact protocols, even casual conversations that led to significant policy changes. The success rate is 94%. Marcus stared at the numbers. That seems high. It's impossible. The baseline success rate for interspecies negotiations, even between allied civilizations, is approximately 37%. The success rate for negotiations between species that have never interacted before drops to less than 15%. Vexera tapped the data pad. Humans achieve success rates that exceed our best diplomatic corps by a factor of 3, and you personally exceed that by another factor of 2. Maybe we're just lucky. Luck doesn't explain pattern recognition. Luck doesn't explain the fact that human negotiators consistently achieve outcomes that benefit all parties involved, even when those parties started out with completely incompatible goals. Vexera leaned forward. And luck definitely doesn't explain why every alien who's had extended contact with humans reports increased levels of trust, cooperation, and what they describe as emotional connection. Marcus felt like he was drowning in information he didn't want to have. What are you saying? I'm saying that humans don't just have empathy, you have weaponized empathy. You can form genuine emotional bonds with beings whose psychology should be completely alien to you. And those bonds change how they think, how they make decisions, how they see the world. Vexera stood up again and began pacing beside the table, her movements sharp and predatory. Do you know what the Thraxians call humans? No. The heart speakers. They believe you can literally communicate with the emotional center of other species' consciousness. The Kalari call you the bridge builders, beings who can connect minds that should never touch. The Crystalline Collective refers to humans as pattern weavers, entities that can reshape social and political structures just by existing within them. She stopped pacing and fixed Marcus with that unsettling silver gaze. Every species that's encountered humans has developed new terminology to describe what you do to them. That's not normal, Marcus. That's unprecedented. Marcus tried to process what he was hearing, but it felt like trying to drink from a fire hose. You're saying that humans are accidentally manipulating alien psychology? Not manipulating. Influencing. There's a difference. Vexera sat back down. Manipulation implies conscious deception or coercion. What humans do is more like emotional resonance. You make other beings feel understood, valued, and connected. And beings who feel understood and valued will do almost anything to maintain that feeling. That's terrifying. Yes, it is. Vexera's agreement was matter of fact. Which is why I need you to come to the Imperial capital and help us figure out how to defend against it. Marcus blinked. Defend against it? Marcus, in the past 3 years, human merchants have established trade relationships with 17 different species that had previously refused all contact with the Empire. Human explorers have been invited to settle on worlds that have been closed to outsiders for centuries. Human diplomats have resolved conflicts that our best negotiators couldn't even get the participants to discuss. Vexera's expression was grim. Your species has been in galactic society for less than 50 years, and you're already reshaping the political landscape. Not through conquest or technological superiority, but through simple human interaction. Do you understand what that means for established powers like the Empire? You're afraid we're going to take over. I'm afraid you're going to make taking over irrelevant. Vexera leaned back in her chair. Why conquer the galaxy when you can convince it to follow you willingly? The cantina around them had returned to something approaching normal noise levels, but Marcus could still feel eyes on them from every direction. He realized that this conversation was probably being recorded by half the intelligence services in the galaxy. So you want me to help you develop, what? Immunity to human empathy? I want you to help us understand how it works. How to recognize it when it's happening. How to maintain objective decision-making when dealing with humans. Vexera's smile was sharp. And I want you to help us figure out if there's a way to replicate the effect. Replicate it? If humans can form genuine emotional connections with any species, imagine what the Empire could accomplish with that ability. Imagine diplomacy without the threat of force. Imagine expansion through invitation rather than conquest. Imagine a galaxy united not by fear, but by genuine cooperation. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. You want to turn empathy into a weapon. I want to turn empathy into a tool. Whether it becomes a weapon depends on who's using it and how. Vexera studied his expression. You're disturbed by the idea. Of course I'm disturbed by it. You're talking about, I don't know, psychological manipulation on a galactic scale. I'm talking about voluntary cooperation on a galactic scale. The manipulation is what's happening now, Marcus. Humans are unconsciously influencing alien behavior patterns without any awareness or control. At least if we understand the mechanism, we can establish ethical guidelines for its use. Vexera reached across the table and placed one hand over Marcus's. Her skin was warm and surprisingly soft, despite the alien texture. Think about what you could accomplish with proper training and resources. Think about the conflicts you could prevent, the suffering you could eliminate. Think about a galaxy where war becomes obsolete because everyone genuinely wants to work together. Marcus stared down at her hand covering his. The alien queen's touch was gentle, but he could feel the strength beneath the surface, strength that could crush bones without effort. It was a perfect metaphor for everything about this conversation. And if I refuse? Then, you continue running, and we continue trying to understand humans without human cooperation. which means more invasive observation, more disruption to human communities, and less chance that we'll develop ethical applications for what we learn. Vexera's tone was matter-of-fact. I'd prefer to work with humans rather than study them like laboratory specimens, but I will protect the Empire's interests either way. It wasn't quite a threat, but Marcus heard the implication clearly enough. Cooperate voluntarily, or be studied involuntarily. What exactly would this job involve? Initially, consultation. We have teams of psychologists, sociologists, and xenobiologists studying human-alien interaction patterns. They need someone who can explain what it feels like from the inside. Vexera removed her hand from his and leaned back. Eventually, we'd want you to participate in controlled interaction experiments with various species. Help us map the exact mechanisms of human empathic projection. And, after that? After that, we develop training protocols. For our diplomats, our military officers, our trade negotiators, anyone who deals with humans on a regular basis. We teach them to recognize when they're being influenced and how to maintain their objectivity. Vexera's smile turned predatory. And we teach them how to use the same techniques themselves. Marcus felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down into an abyss that could swallow the entire galaxy. You're talking about fundamentally changing how interspecies relations work. I'm talking about evolution, Marcus. Social evolution. Humans have introduced a new factor into galactic civilization, whether intentionally or not. We can either adapt to that factor or be overwhelmed by it. She gestured around the cantina, where dozens of different alien species sat at tables, drinking, trading, and socializing. Look around you. This kind of casual intermingling between species was rare 50 years ago. Most aliens stuck to their own kind, their own territories, their own carefully negotiated treaties and trade agreements. But, wherever humans go, barriers break down. Suspicious aliens start cooperating. Ancient rivalries get set aside. Closed societies open their doors. Marcus followed her gaze, and, for the first time, he really noticed the diversity around them. Thraxians sharing drinks with Kalari. Vorthan merchants discussing trade routes with crystalline entities whose names he couldn't even pronounce. A group of energy beings flickering in and out of visibility while engaged in animated conversation with a family of insectoid creatures. You think humans did this? I think humans catalyzed it. This kind of casual integration requires a level of trust and emotional comfort that most species can't achieve with aliens. But humans make everyone feel comfortable. You make them feel safe to be themselves, to express their needs and concerns without fear of judgment or exploitation. Vexera's expression grew thoughtful. Do you know what the most common comment is in our intelligence reports about human-alien interactions? Marcus shook his head. The aliens say they feel understood by the humans they encounter. Not just heard or acknowledged, understood. That's a powerful thing, Marcus. Understanding creates loyalty. And loyalty creates power. She stood up suddenly, and Marcus realized their conversation had been going on for almost an hour. Around them, the cantina's clientele was starting to change as the station's work shifts rotated. New faces, new species, new conversations in languages he couldn't identify. I need an answer, Marcus. The simple statement carried the weight of absolute authority. This was Queen Vexera of the Zephyrian Empire, a being who commanded fleets and conquered star systems, and she was asking him to make a decision that could reshape galactic civilization. What if I want time to think about it? You've had 3 years to think about it. You've been running from the implications of your own abilities, hoping they'd go away or stop being important. They haven't. Vexera's tone was patient but implacable. The galaxy is changing, Marcus. Humans are changing it. The question is whether the change happens with human cooperation or without it. Marcus looked around the cantina one more time, at the impossible mix of species socializing together, at the evidence of the very phenomenon Vexera was describing. Then, he looked back at the alien queen, whose silver eyes seemed to see right through him. If I agree to this, what guarantee do I have that you won't use what you learned to hurt humans? You don't. Vexera's honesty was brutal. But, consider the alternative. If we study humans without cooperation, we'll still learn what we need to know. It will just take longer and be less pleasant for everyone involved. She leaned down until her face was level with his again. But I will give you this guarantee: if you work with us, you'll have input on how our research is applied. You'll help establish the ethical guidelines. You'll be involved in every decision about how human empathic abilities are understood and utilized. And if I work against you? Then, you become just another interesting specimen to be studied and catalogued. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to think through the impossible situation he'd found himself in. 3 hours ago, his biggest concern had been whether the station's security would recognize him from an old wanted poster. Now he was being asked to help an alien empire weaponize human empathy. But, as he thought about it, he realized Vexera was right about one thing: the change was happening whether humans cooperated or not. Every human interaction with aliens was already reshaping galactic politics. The question wasn't whether to get involved, humans were already involved. The question was whether to have a voice in how that involvement developed. If I agree, he said slowly, I want guarantees about how humans are treated. Protection for human communities. Ethical oversight of all research. And I want other humans involved in the program. Done. The immediate agreement surprised him. Just like that? Just like that. Marcus, I'm not interested in exploiting humans. I'm interested in understanding them. If anything, protecting human communities is essential to the success of this research. We can't study empathic projection if we damage the empathy in the process. Vexera straightened up and extended her hand. Do we have an agreement? Marcus stared at the offered hand, knowing that shaking it would change everything. Not just for him, but potentially for every human and alien in the galaxy. The weight of that responsibility was crushing. But then, he thought about the Kalari children who were still alive because one human had talked to one Imperial commander. He thought about the impossible diversity of species sharing drinks in this cantina. He thought about a galaxy where cooperation might actually be stronger than conquest. He reached out and shook the alien queen's hand. We have an agreement. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of Queen Vexera's personal transport, staring out at the imperial capital of Zephyr Prime, and tried not to throw up. It wasn't the sight of the planet that made him nauseous, though Zephyr Prime was admittedly overwhelming in its alien grandeur. The world was a massive sphere of deep blue oceans and silver continents, with 3 moons that cast everything in an eerie, shifting light. Orbital installations the size of small cities ringed the planet like jewelry, connected by streams of traffic that flowed between them in patterns too complex for human eyes to follow. No, what made Marcus nauseous was the gradually dawning realization of what he'd agreed to do. Impressive, isn't it? Vexera's voice came from behind him, and Marcus turned to see the alien queen approaching with that fluid, predatory grace he was starting to get used to. She'd changed clothes since their meeting on the station. Now she wore what he assumed was formal Zephyrian attire, a flowing robe that seemed to be made of liquid starlight and armor plates that looked both ceremonial and completely functional. It's definitely something, Marcus managed. How many people live down there? Approximately 4 billion Zephyrians, plus another 2 billion representatives from various client species. Vexera moved to stand beside him at the observation window. Zephyr Prime has been the Empire's capital for over 600 years. Every major decision affecting this corner of the galaxy has been made on that world. Marcus watched a massive cargo hauler, easily 10 times the size of any human ship he'd ever seen, ease into one of the orbital docking facilities. And now you want to make decisions about my species there too. I want to make decisions with your species. There's a difference. Marcus glanced at her, noting the emphasis. Over the 3 weeks of their journey from Nexus Station to the Imperial capital, he'd come to realize that Vexera was very careful with her words. Every statement had layers of meaning, every casual comment contained implications he was still learning to recognize. You keep saying that, he said. But what happens when human interests conflict with Imperial interests? Then, we negotiate. Vexera's tone was matter of fact. That's what this entire project is about, Marcus. Learning how to negotiate effectively across species barriers. Humans excel at finding solutions that benefit everyone involved. That's exactly what the Empire needs. A soft chime sounded through the ship's communication system, followed by an announcement in what Marcus had learned was formal Zephyrian. Vexera listened for a moment, then turned back to him. "We're beginning our descent. Are you ready for this?" Marcus looked out at the alien world below, where he was about to become either humanity's greatest advocate or its greatest traitor, and tried to convince himself he had any idea what he was doing. "No," he said honestly. "But I don't think that's going to stop what happens next." Vexera's smile was sharp and approving. "Good. Overconfidence would be a liability in what you're about to undertake." The descent to Zephyr Prime took another hour, and Marcus spent most of it pressed against the observation window, watching an alien civilization unfold below them. The cities were vast sprawls of crystalline towers and flowing architecture that seemed to grow from the landscape rather than being built on it. Transportation networks that looked like rivers of light connected urban centers across entire continents. And everywhere, Marcus could see evidence of the Empire's diversity, structures that were clearly designed for different atmospheric requirements, different gravity preferences, different aesthetic sensibilities. "How many species are represented down there?" he asked. 47 currently maintain permanent diplomatic or trade missions on Zephyr Prime, Vexera replied. Another 136 have occasional representation. The Empire encompasses more than 200 member species across 63 star systems. Marcus tried to wrap his head around those numbers. Humanity had barely figured out how to establish colonies on 3 worlds. The idea of coordinating with hundreds of different species across dozens of star systems was mind-boggling. How do you keep track of it all? Very carefully. And with a great deal of bureaucratic infrastructure. Vexera's expression was wry. Which is why your abilities are so intriguing. Most of our diplomatic challenges stem from simple miscommunication and cultural misunderstanding. If humans can bridge those gaps naturally. She trailed off as their ship settled into what appeared to be a private landing facility. Through the windows, Marcus could see a welcoming committee of aliens in elaborate formal dress, their postures and movements suggesting a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "They're nervous about meeting me," he observed. "They're nervous about what you represent. Most of them have read the reports about human empathic projection. They're not sure whether you're going to accidentally make them agree to something they'll regret later." Marcus turned to stare at her. "That's supposed to be reassuring? It's supposed to be honest." Vexera moved toward the ship's exit. "Come on. Time to make some new friends." The next few hours were a blur of introductions, formal ceremonies, and conversations in languages that made Marcus's translator implant work overtime. He met the Director of Imperial Intelligence, a being that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a computer terminal. He shook hands, claws, tentacles, and appendages he couldn't even identify with representatives from more species than he could keep track of. He toured research facilities that studied everything from quantum mechanics to xenopsychology. And, through it all, he could feel them watching him. It wasn't malicious attention, more like scientific curiosity. Every alien he encountered seemed to be cataloging his reactions, analyzing his responses, measuring his effect on their own thought processes. Marcus felt like a laboratory specimen that happened to be mobile. "This is overwhelming," he finally admitted to Vexera as they walked through what she called the diplomatic quarter, a section of the capital devoted to interspecies coordination. "It's supposed to be," she replied. "We wanted you to understand the scope of what we're dealing with before we began the actual research." They stopped in front of a building that looked like it had been grown rather than constructed, its walls flowing in organic curves that somehow still suggested geometric precision. A sign in multiple languages identified it as the Center for Interspecies Psychology. "This is where you'll be working," Vexera explained. "The Empire's leading experts on alien psychology and behavior. They've been studying the reports about human empathic abilities for months, and they have questions." Marcus looked up at the building, which seemed to loom over him despite its graceful architecture. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that will help us understand whether humans are the galaxy's greatest diplomatic asset or its most dangerous psychological weapon." Before Marcus could respond, the building's entrance opened and a group of aliens emerged. Marcus recognized a few species, Thraxians, Kalari, some others he'd encountered during his years of travel, but most were completely unfamiliar. What struck him was their body language. They moved with the careful precision of scientists approaching a dangerous experiment. The lead figure was a Zephyrian who looked older than Vexera, with more elaborate tattoos and ceremonial scarification. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that made even the Queen straighten slightly. "Your Majesty. This is the human? Dr. Thessa, meet Marcus Chen." "Marcus, this is Dr. Thessa Var Nexus, head of interspecies psychology and my former mentor." Dr. Thessa approached Marcus with the measured steps of someone studying a potentially dangerous specimen. Her silver eyes were even more intense than Vexera's, and Marcus felt like she was performing some kind of alien psychological scan just by looking at him. "Interesting," she said finally. "You appear quite ordinary for someone who's supposedly revolutionizing interspecies relations." "I get that a lot," Marcus replied, and was surprised to see several of the aliens behind Dr. Thessa react with what looked like amusement. Tell me, Mr. Chen, what do you think you're doing right now?" The question caught Marcus off guard. "I'm sorry? What do you think you're doing, psychologically speaking, in this interaction? What are your goals? What effects are you trying to achieve?" Marcus glanced at Vexera, who nodded encouragingly. "I'm trying to be polite? To make a good first impression? To not accidentally start an interstellar incident? And how are you attempting to achieve those goals?" Marcus thought about it for a moment. "I'm trying to read your body language and tone of voice to understand what you're thinking and feeling. I'm trying to respond in a way that will make you feel comfortable and respected. I'm trying to find common ground between what I want and what you want." Dr. Thessa exchanged a look with several of the other researchers. "And you consider this normal behavior?" "Of course. Doesn't everyone do that?" The reaction was immediate and startling. Several of the aliens stepped backward, others made sounds that Marcus's translator couldn't interpret, and Dr. Thessa's eyes widened dramatically. "Fascinating," she breathed. "You're completely unconscious of the process." "What process?" "The empathic projection. You're actively reading and responding to the emotional states of 7 different species simultaneously, adjusting your behavior in real time to optimize our psychological comfort, and you think it's just being polite." Marcus looked around at the gathered aliens, noting for the first time the diversity of their reactions to him. The Thraxians looked relaxed and interested. The Kalari seemed almost protective. A species he didn't recognize appeared to be fighting some kind of internal struggle between suspicion and trust. "I don't understand," he said. "Of course you don't. That's what makes it so extraordinary." Dr. Thessa began circling him slowly, like a predator studying prey. "Tell me, what do you sense from the Vorthan in our group?" Marcus looked at the 4-armed alien she'd indicated, automatically noting the tension in its posture, the way its secondary arms were held protectively across its torso, the rapid fluttering of what he assumed were breathing appendages. "He's nervous," Marcus said. "Probably scared. Definitely suspicious of me, but trying not to show it. He wants to trust what he's hearing about humans, but his instincts are telling him to be careful." The Vorthan in question made a sound like escaping steam and took another step backward. "How do you know that?" Dr. Thessa demanded. I can see it. Body language, breathing patterns, the way he's positioned relative to the rest of the group." Marcus paused, suddenly uncertain. "That's normal, right? Anyone can read basic emotional cues." "Anyone can read emotional cues from their own species," Dr. Thessa corrected. "Most beings can learn to interpret basic emotions from species they've studied extensively." "But, you just performed a detailed psychological analysis of a Vorthan using purely visual cues, despite having no formal training in Vorthan psychology." She stopped directly in front of him. "Do you know what the success rate is for untrained cross-species emotional interpretation?" Marcus shook his head. "Less than 20%. Random chance would be more reliable." Dr. Thessa's smile was sharp and scientific. You're operating at approximately 95% accuracy across all 7 species present. That should be impossible. Marcus felt that familiar chill running down his spine. Maybe I'm just good at guessing. Let's test that theory. Dr. Thessa gestured to another member of the group, a being that looked like a walking flower with crystalline petals. What do you sense from the Solani? Marcus looked at the alien, automatically cataloging the subtle shifts in its petal arrangements, the way light refracted differently through its crystalline structure when it moved, the frequency of its harmonic communication sounds. Curiosity, he said slowly. But, also, sadness? Like it's remembering something painful. And, underneath that, there's hope. It wants to believe that what it's hearing about humans is true, but it's been disappointed before. The Solani made a sound like wind chimes in a storm and turned to Dr. Thessa, speaking rapidly in harmonics that Marcus's translator couldn't handle. What did it say? Marcus asked. Dr. Thessa was staring at him with an expression that might have been awe or terror. It asked how you knew about the loss of its offspring in the HFY War. That information isn't in any file you could have accessed. Marcus felt the world tilt around him. I didn't know about that. I could see that it was sad about something. The Solani don't express emotion through body language the way most species do, Dr. Thessa said quietly. Their emotional states are communicated through harmonic frequencies and crystalline refractions that require specialized equipment to detect and trained experts to interpret. What you just did should have required years of study and direct neural interface technology. She turned to address the entire group. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings, what we're witnessing here is beyond anything our previous research suggested. Mr. Chin isn't just empathically projecting, he's performing unconscious xenopsychological analysis at a level that exceeds our most advanced diagnostic systems. Marcus looked around at the assembled aliens, seeing wonder and fear in equal measure on their faces. This is bad, isn't it? On the contrary, Vexara said, speaking for the first time since the introductions began. This is exactly what we hoped to find. The question now is whether we can learn to understand and replicate what you're doing. Dr. Thessa nodded grimly. Indeed. Because if humans can read and influence alien psychology at this level without training or conscious effort, then every assumption about interspecies relations needs to be reevaluated. She gestured toward the building. Shall we begin? Marcus looked up at the Center for Interspecies Psychology, realizing that he was about to undergo the most intensive examination of his life. These aliens were going to study every aspect of his psychology, his empathy, his unconscious behavior patterns. They were going to try to understand exactly what made him human. And, then, they were going to try to figure out whether that was something to be celebrated or feared. Dr. Thessa, he said as they walked toward the entrance, what happens if you determine that humans are dangerous? The alien psychologist paused at the building's threshold and looked back at him with those unsettling silver eyes. Then, we'll have to decide whether to protect the galaxy from humanity, or protect humanity from the galaxy's reaction to what you are. Marcus swallowed hard and followed her inside, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake in human history. 6 weeks into the most intensive psychological examination of his life, Marcus Chen made a discovery that changed everything he thought he knew about humanity. He was sitting in what Dr. Thessa called the observation chamber, a room that looked like a comfortable lounge but was actually packed with more monitoring equipment than most starships. Sensors tracked everything from his heart rate to his brain activity to microscopic changes in his facial expressions. Cameras recorded his every movement from 17 different angles. And, through a one-way mirror, teams of alien psychologists watched his every interaction with their test subjects. Today's test subject was a hegari, a species Marcus had never encountered before. The alien looked like a cross between a bear and a cactus, with thick, spiny fur and small, deeply intelligent eyes. According to Dr. Thessa's briefing, the hegari were known for their extreme xenophobia and had never successfully integrated with any other species. They maintained diplomatic relations with the Empire purely out of necessity, but cultural exchange was virtually non-existent. Good morning, Marcus said in Galactic Standard, settling into his chair across from the hegari. I'm Marcus. Thank you for volunteering for this. The Hegari, whose name was something like Grodhaktel, grunted and shifted in his specialized chair. His translator rendered the sound as, this one agreed to participate only because the alternative was continued economic sanctions. That's honest, Marcus replied. I appreciate honesty. Humans always say they appreciate honesty, but they become distressed when given truth without social cushioning. Marcus felt a smile tugging at his lips. You've dealt with humans before? This one has reviewed interaction records. Humans appear to engage in ritualistic deception for purposes of emotional comfort. It is confusing. It can be confusing to us too sometimes. Marcus leaned back in his chair, automatically adjusting his posture to mirror the Hegari's defensive positioning. Social cushioning, that's actually a good term for it. We do try to soften hard truths to make them easier to accept. Why? The simple question caught Marcus off guard. Because harsh truths can hurt. If you care about someone, you don't want to cause them unnecessary pain. But truth remains truth regardless of emotional packaging. Does deception serve any logical purpose? Marcus thought about it for a moment, watching the way Grodhaktel's spiny fur shifted with his breathing, noting the subtle changes in posture that suggested the alien was genuinely curious rather than hostile. I suppose it depends on whether your goal is to transfer information or to transfer understanding, Marcus said slowly. Sometimes the raw truth contains so much emotional noise that the actual information gets lost. If I tell you that your idea is completely stupid, you might focus more on defending yourself than on understanding what's wrong with the idea. But if you soften the critique? If I say your idea has some interesting elements but might benefit from a different approach, you're more likely to actually listen to the feedback. Grodhaktel was quiet for a long moment, his small eyes studying Marcus with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable. But, somehow, it wasn't. Marcus found himself relaxing despite being under alien scrutiny. This is manipulation, the Hegari said finally. Is it? Or is it optimization? Explain the distinction. Marcus felt himself sliding into what he'd started thinking of as empathy mode, that unconscious state where he found himself automatically reading and responding to the emotional undertones of a conversation. Manipulation is about control, he said. You manipulate someone when you want them to do something that benefits you, regardless of whether it benefits them. Optimization is about finding the best possible outcome for everyone involved. And, you believe humans practice optimization rather than manipulation? I think humans practice both, depending on the person and the situation. But, when we're at our best, we try to find solutions that make everyone happy. Grodhaktel's spiny fur rippled in what Marcus had learned was the Hegari equivalent of laughter. An optimistic assessment. Most species prioritize their own interests above others. Most species haven't had to share a planet with only themselves for their entire evolutionary history. The words came out before Marcus could stop them, and he immediately wondered where they'd come from. But Grodhaktel leaned forward with sudden interest. Elaborate. Well, think about it. Every other species in the galaxy evolved alongside other sapient species, right? They had to learn to compete with beings that were similar to them but different enough to be rivals. But humans evolved alone on Earth. The only competition we faced was from ourselves. Marcus felt like he was working through an idea that had been lurking in the back of his mind for weeks. We had to learn to cooperate with beings who were fundamentally similar to us but culturally, individually, and socially different. We developed empathy as a survival tool for dealing with other humans who might think completely differently than we do. And, you believe this makes humans superior negotiators? I think it makes us different. When a Zephyrian negotiates with a Thraxian, they're dealing with completely alien psychology. They can learn to work with it, but they can't really understand it. But, when a human negotiates with anyone, we're unconsciously treating them like a really exotic human. Grodhaktel was staring at Marcus with those small, intelligent eyes. You project human psychological models onto alien minds. Not exactly. It's more like, we assume that underneath all the cultural and biological differences, there are universal emotional needs. The need to feel safe, to feel valued, to feel understood. So we try to address those needs first, and then work out the practical details. And this is effective because? Marcus thought about it, watching the way Grothaktel's posture had shifted during their conversation. The alien was no longer sitting defensively, his spines had relaxed, his body language was open and engaged. Without conscious effort, Marcus had made a xenophobic alien comfortable enough to engage in genuine philosophical discussion. Because those needs really are universal, he said quietly. Every sapient species has to have some form of social cooperation to develop civilization. Which means every species has to have some mechanism for establishing trust and reducing conflict. We just happen to be really good at finding and activating those mechanisms. Fascinating. Grothaktel settled back in his chair. This one begins to understand why other species find humans compelling. The word hit Marcus like a physical blow. Compelling. Not threatening, not manipulative, but compelling. Like humans were offering something that other species wanted but couldn't quite identify. What do you mean? This one entered this interaction with significant skepticism about human motives. The concept of empathic projection seemed likely to be either exaggeration or deception. Grothaktel's spine shifted in complex patterns. But, after 30 minutes of conversation, this one finds himself genuinely interested in human perspectives on interspecies relations. That's good, right? It is unexpected. Hegari do not typically develop emotional investment in alien viewpoints. Yet this one finds himself curious about how humans might approach the trade disputes between the Hegari and the Vorth Collective. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. You want my advice on a political issue? This one wants to understand how human empathic analysis might reframe the conflict. Through the one-way mirror, Marcus could see Dr. Thessa and her team frantically taking notes. This was exactly what they'd been trying to document, the moment when aliens began actively seeking human input on their most sensitive issues. I don't know anything about the conflict between your species and the Vorth Collective, Marcus said carefully. Irrelevant. This one wishes to observe human analytical processes, not receive specific policy recommendations. Marcus realized he was at a crossroads. Everything he said next would be recorded, analyzed, and probably used to develop training protocols for Imperial diplomats. But he also realized that Grothaktel was offering him a genuine opportunity to understand how human empathy worked from the outside. Okay, he said. Tell me about the conflict. For the next hour, Grothaktel explained a complex trade dispute involving resource rights, territorial boundaries, and cultural misunderstandings that stretched back centuries. As he listened, Marcus found himself automatically organizing the information not in terms of legal precedents or strategic advantages, but in terms of unmet needs and emotional grievances. So the Vorth Collective feels like the Hegari have been taking advantage of their technological limitations, he said when Grothaktel finished. And the Hegari feel like the Vorth Collective is trying to renegotiate agreements that were fairly made. Accurate summary. But, underneath that, the Vorth are frustrated because they feel disrespected, like you treat them as inferiors rather than equals. And the Hegari are frustrated because you feel like you're being punished for your ancestors' success in developing better technology. Grothaktel's spines went completely flat. How did you derive that analysis? Marcus paused, trying to explain a process he wasn't consciously aware of performing. I listened to the way you described each side's positions. The language you used, the emotional undertones, the things you emphasized and the things you glossed over. It's like listening to an argument between friends. The actual dispute is usually about something much deeper than what they're arguing about on the surface. And your recommendation? You need to address the emotional issues before you can solve the practical ones. The Vorth need to feel respected and valued as equals. The Hegari need to feel like their historical achievements are acknowledged rather than resented. Once both sides feel heard and understood, the actual trade terms will be much easier to negotiate. Grothaktel was silent for a long moment, his small eyes studying Marcus with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable. Finally, he spoke. This one has participated in 47 diplomatic sessions regarding this dispute over the past 6 years. In that time, no negotiator has suggested addressing the emotional foundations of the conflict. Maybe they were focused on the legal and economic issues? Maybe they lacked the psychological tools to recognize that legal and economic issues are expressions of deeper emotional needs. The statement hung in the air between them like a revelation. Marcus felt like he'd just been given a glimpse into something much larger than individual empathy, a fundamental difference in how humans and aliens approached the very concept of conflict resolution. Dr. Thessa, he said, addressing the one-way mirror, I think we need to expand the scope of this research. The intercom crackled to life. What do you mean, Mr. Chen? I mean, we're not just looking at empathic projection. We're looking at an entirely different paradigm for understanding civilization itself. Marcus turned back to Grothachtel, who was watching him with what might have been approval. Human empathy isn't just a tool for reading emotions, Marcus continued. It's a framework for understanding all social interaction as fundamentally emotional rather than fundamentally rational. That's why humans seem to break the rules of diplomacy. We're not really playing the same game as everyone else. Dr. Thessa's voice came through the intercom again, sharp with scientific excitement. Elaborate. Most species treat diplomacy like a chess match, logical moves based on strategic advantages. But humans treat it like family therapy. We assume that every conflict is ultimately about unmet emotional needs, and our job is to help everyone involved feel better about the situation. Marcus looked around the observation chamber, suddenly, aware that he was probably redefining humanity's role in galactic civilization in real time. That's why the Chun Protocol works. That's why humans get impossible results in negotiations. We're not just good at reading emotions, we're good at treating political problems as psychological problems. Through the mirror, he could see Dr. Thessa conferring urgently with her team. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that made Marcus's stomach drop. Mr. Chen, if your analysis is correct, then humans aren't just diplomatically gifted. You're potentially the most disruptive force in galactic politics since the invention of faster-than-light travel. Marcus met Grothachtel's small, intelligent eyes and saw his own realization reflected there. This wasn't about empathy anymore. This was about the possibility that humans had accidentally developed a completely new approach to civilization itself. And nobody knew what that meant for the galaxy. 3 months after his arrival on Zephyr Prime, Marcus Chun found himself standing in the Empire's highest council chamber, facing a decision that would determine the future of every sapient species in the galaxy. The chamber was a massive circular room with a domed ceiling that displayed real-time images of the stars beyond. Representatives from 57 different species sat in concentric rings around the central speaking area, their varied forms creating a tapestry of galactic diversity that would have been beautiful if the atmosphere hadn't been so tense. Marcus stood in the center of it all, with Queen Vexera at his right side and Dr. Thessa at his left. In front of him, a holographic display showed the results of 3 months of intensive research that had fundamentally changed everyone's understanding of what humans were and what they meant for the galaxy. The evidence is conclusive, Dr. Thessa was saying, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. Human empathic projection is not simply an enhanced form of emotional intelligence. It represents a completely different approach to social organization and conflict resolution. She gestured to the holographic display, which showed a complex web of interconnected data. Every human test subject demonstrated the same basic pattern: unconscious psychological analysis of alien emotional states, automatic behavioral adjustment to optimize cross-species comfort, and consistent reframing of conflicts in terms of unmet emotional needs rather than competing interests. A Thraxian representative in the third ring raised one of his 4 arms. Dr. Thessa, you're describing sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques. How is this different from the mind control tactics employed by species like the Psioni? Because it's unconscious and genuinely empathetic, Dr. Thessa replied. The Psioni use conscious telepathic manipulation to override alien will. Humans use unconscious emotional resonance to create voluntary cooperation. The key difference is that humans genuinely want what's best for everyone involved. And how can we verify their genuine intentions? The question came from a Kalari diplomat, whose iridescent scales shifted nervously. If humans can unconsciously influence our decision-making processes, how do we know when our positive feelings toward them are authentic? Marcus felt the weight of dozens of alien gazes focusing on him. This was the question that had dominated the council's sessions for the past week, the question that would determine whether humanity was welcomed into galactic civilization or quarantined as a psychological threat. "May I speak?" Marcus asked, and received a gesture of permission from Vexera. "I understand your concern," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "You're worried that human empathy is just a more sophisticated form of manipulation. That our apparent desire to help everyone is actually a strategy for getting what we want." Murmurs ran through the assembled representatives. Marcus could see the tension in their body language, the way different species were unconsciously clustering together for comfort. "But, I want you to consider something," Marcus continued. "In the past 3 months, you've studied human behavior more intensively than we've ever studied ourselves. You've analyzed our empathic responses, catalogued our unconscious behavioral patterns, and documented our effects on alien psychology. And, in all of that research, what have you found about human goals and motivations?" The Thraxian representative consulted a datapad. Human subjects consistently expressed desire for mutual benefit, conflict resolution, and what they term everyone being happy. And, when presented with scenarios where human interests conflicted with alien interests, humans consistently sought solutions that benefited all parties, even when more advantageous options were available. Marcus nodded. "That's because human empathy isn't a tool for getting what we want, it's how we figure out what we should want in the first place." He gestured to the assembled representatives. "Every species in this chamber evolved alongside other sapient species. You learn to compete, to establish hierarchies, to protect your interests from alien threats. But humans evolved alone. The only threats we faced came from other humans, which meant our survival depended on learning to cooperate with beings who were simultaneously similar and different." Marcus began walking slowly around the central area, making eye contact with representatives from different species. "We developed empathy as a survival tool for dealing with internal diversity. And that empathy taught us that the best way to protect ourselves is to make sure everyone around us is also safe and happy." A crystalline entity in the outer ring chimed a question that Marcus's translator rendered as, "You claim human empathy is altruistic rather than manipulative. But, the end result is that aliens consistently make decisions that favor human interests. How is this not exploitation?" "Because human interests consistently align with alien interests," Marcus replied. "Think about it, what do humans want? We want to be safe, to have enough resources, to feel valued and understood, to live in a galaxy where conflicts are resolved peacefully. Those aren't specifically human goals, those are the goals of any reasonable civilization." He stopped walking and faced the crystalline entity directly. "The reason aliens make decisions that favor human interests is because human interests are designed to favor everyone's interests. We can't be safe unless everyone is safe. We can't have enough resources unless everyone has enough resources. We can't feel valued unless everyone feels valued." Dr. Thessa stepped forward. "Mr. Chen is correct. Our analysis indicates that human empathic projection works by identifying universal needs and desires that transcend species boundaries. Humans don't manipulate aliens into serving human interests, they help aliens recognize that their own interests are better served through cooperation than conflict. But, what about species whose interests genuinely conflict with human values?" The question came from a Vorthan diplomat whose forearms gestured emphatically. "What happens when humans encounter species that value conquest over cooperation, domination over equality?" Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. This was the question that had kept him awake for the past several nights, the question that touched on the darker implications of human empathy. "That's a more complicated issue," he admitted. "We've discovered that human empathic projection doesn't work on every species equally. It's most effective with species that have some capacity for reciprocal empathy, beings that can, at least potentially, care about the welfare of others. And species that lack that capacity? Humans tend to find them deeply disturbing and will usually avoid contact if possible. But, if forced to interact..." Marcus paused, thinking about the implications. "We'll still try to find common ground, but our efforts will be focused on containment rather than cooperation." Queen Vexera stepped forward. "Which brings us to the central question this council must address. The research has confirmed that humans represent a fundamentally new type of civilization, one based on empathic cooperation rather than competitive dominance. The question is whether the galaxy is ready for that kind of change. She activated a new display on the holographic projector. These are the results from our controlled interaction studies. In every case where humans were involved in interspecies negotiations, conflicts were resolved more quickly, with greater satisfaction from all parties, and with more durable long-term agreements. The display showed graph after graph of improved outcomes, reduced hostilities, increased trade volumes.